Alex, you have already started, and it amazes me every year that you've already started your preseason opponent reviews. And I think that you've done a couple of them now. How many are you through on the Big Spur?
I've done Virginia Tech. I did Missouri today and Vanderbilt. So I try to kind of get them done, maybe even leading into before preseason camp. Last year, I got a little bit too close where I was talking about Clemson about 2 weeks out from the first week of the season. So I'm trying to get it done a little bit quicker. But it's kind of interesting, especially getting that Virginia Tech one done. And I know we're going to dive into more of the Hokies here in a minute, but it's really an interesting matchup, I think.
I think so too. And Alex, with that being said, I've done a little bit of research into Virginia Tech. I feel like I know the nuts and bolts, but you've already done your deep dive. So, Alex, what can we say about the Hokies from a coaching standpoint going into this season?
Yeah, so Brent Pry, he's going into his fourth season as the head coach of Virginia Tech. Last year Virginia Tech finished, 6-7 overall record. They, got to faced off against Minnesota in the Duke's Mayo Bowl, and I think lost like 24-10. And from kind of an offensive coaching standpoint, Tyler Bowen, who is the offensive coordinator, he left to go to Ohio State to be the offensive line coach. So I actually kind of like the hire that they made with Phil Montgomery. He's a former head coach at Tulsa, a few years or multiple years there, and actually comes to Virginia Tech after being the Birmingham Stallions offensive coordinator in the USFL now. I think it's what the name is called. It's kind of changed around here lately, but has led offenses to at Auburn, Baylor, and Houston. So an experienced guy, and not the I know we'll get more into offensive here, but it's you got your quarterback coming back, so I think that's one thing. Kyron Jones did miss a little bit of time due to a minor medical procedure in spring practice. And, I guess we can go and start moving into some of the offensive things with Virginia Tech. That's something that, I think you'd have a little bit of worry about for if you're Virginia Tech is just having a new offensive coordinator and your quarterback missing some time in spring practice due to injury. Like, I think you want to have as much, connection and time to build on the field as possible. But, Kyron Jones is a really good quarterback. We've kind of seen what he can do. Like, he's an experienced guy. I think last year threw for 1,500 yards, a little over 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns. But, he's really can be a threat on the ground too. I think 336 yards and 6 scores. So, going to be a guy that, has an experienced quarterback, can beat you kind of both ways. And you're really going to test South Carolina's offense early on. And then really kind of from a coaching standpoint, it's going to be, you can go back and look at old Philip Montgomery's offenses at Auburn, Baylor, and Houston, and heck, maybe even Birmingham Stallions. But you're going to kind of have to figure out, what can we gain from, what we've seen from Virginia Tech and his offenses, kind of put a game plan together.
Yeah, it's interesting because there was a picture that was floating around, I think yesterday or the day before, with the quarterback Drones, who looked like he had his foot completely covered up on the field. I wouldn't read too much into that nowadays. We're getting too close to the start of the season, and whether that was precautionary, medical, or just fool's gold, you really don't know. So, as Will Muschamp would say, he's got a foot, and we'll see what happens there. So, Alex, I do think it's interesting that the new offensive coordinator Montgomery did coach Robert Griffin III, and as we think about it, that has been a number of years ago. I mean, golly, RG3, he was a thing when I was in grad school, so that was like 2013. So It's been a long time, but coaches don't forget things. Do you think it means anything that a coach has been, potentially out of the mainstream of Power 5 football or Power 2 football for a while?
I mean, not. I don't think not really, because I think you kind of just, if you're Philip Montgomery, you roll with what you saw worked during your time at those other schools, and I think you kind of just roll with it and see. Like, I think it's one of those where it's kind of hard to say now. Maybe you see what Virginia Tech can do in the first half of the schedule, and especially because you do have an experienced quarterback in Jones. But that's something that kind of what I was talking about earlier. Like, that could make game planning for Virginia Tech a little bit challenging, just because you haven't seen a Philip Montgomery offense in college in a long time. Like, kind of just had to piece some things together, and that could end up being pretty challenging to build a game plan around.
Yeah, and Alex, I didn't mean to set you up there, but Michael Lim was right on it. If you say it's going to be a challenge for Montgomery, it's going to be a challenge for Mike Shula as well.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
You really can't say that. But at let's see, it looks like the backfield. There's a transfer from Bowling Green. I don't know how many running backs they actually have that we can talk much about that we've seen. But overall, it seems like at running back and wide receiver, it's going to be a transfer laden roster. And going back to what you just said about Montgomery being the offensive coordinator, I don't think South Carolina knows what to expect.
Yeah, and kind of to the running back point, like, Virginia Tech, when we get to defense, we'll talk about some of their losses that they had from draft or transfer portal or whatnot. But offensively, the biggest loss they had was Bashul Tuten, who was a fourth-round pick by the Jaguars. And guy that was over 100 or 1,000-yard rusher last year and 15 touchdowns. And they got one guy, Jeremiah Coney, who's coming back, who has 179 yards rushing last year. But I think the guy that's going to be to watch for them is Bowling Green transfer Terrion Stewart, who rushed for 898 yards last season, a really good back. And they also added Braden Bennett, the Coastal Carolina transfer running back, who he had 781 yards last year. So, Tuden, that's going to be hard to replace. He's a really good running back for them last year. And obviously you see that with the Jaguars taking him in the fourth round. But I am kind of intrigued to see, kind of learn even more about those two backs that they got. Because, Terrion Stewart, you see some stuff about him and his potential. And then Braden Bennett, obviously, both of these guys have, shown what they can do in college. I'm interested to see kind of how that turns out.
And then the offensive line is just another question mark for Virginia Tech. They're going to be replacing a ton of starters. And for me, Alex, when I think about this, and as we kind of round out the offense for Virginia Tech, this is an opportunity for the South Carolina defense to really make a statement game to start the season. And I would be concerned if the defensive line is not able to get much of a push. Not crazy concerned, but still concerned knowing all the new faces they have on the offensive line.
Yeah, there will be a ton of new faces for Virginia Tech. I can't remember if you mentioned it or not, but they lost their top four receivers from last year too, in Gosnell, Lane, Jennings, and DeQuan Felton. They got Benji Gosnell coming back, who was their leading pass catcher with 32 catches for 341 yards, and Aiden Green's coming back as well. But they added a few guys in there that I think could be intriguing. Donovan Green, I think, is kind of starting to work back a little bit from an injury. He was at Wake Forest. He had 380 yards receiving last year. And Isaiah Spencer was a Jackson State transfer who had over 600 yards receiving. But a lot of new faces, and that's tough to lose your top running back and also your top four wide receivers to go along with some of the losses that they had on the offensive line. And they brought in Matt Moore, who was the offensive line coach of West Virginia. He's going to be at Virginia Tech this year. And he actually brought three guys with him from West Virginia. And so we'll see. They had another big loss on that offensive line too, and Xavier Chaplin, who was one of the top guys in the transfer portal. And I think he's going to Auburn this year. So, we'll see. It's a lot of new faces. And, again, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with both now Mike Shula and both coaches in this game. It's going to be interesting to see how the defense's game plan for this, being that really kind of, for the most part, really on Virginia Tech's side of this from an offensive standpoint, just a whole bunch of new faces.
Well, on the defensive side, Alex, it doesn't get much better. And look, this is one of those things where, this is the classic South Carolina 10-point favorite can lay an egg, but they have a new defensive coordinator as well, Alex.
Yeah, make sure I'm pronouncing this right. Sam Skeefs. I may not be.
You're asking the wrong person. If you're asking me for
I think that's right. I apologize if it's not, but a guy that's got some NFL experience that comes back there. So it's I keep saying it, but a lot of new faces that South Carolina's got to prepare for. And again, on the same side for Virginia Tech, there's going to be some new faces they got to prepare for from a South Carolina standpoint as well. But that's why I mentioned not really much at media days, but when you get into preseason camp and get into those press conferences and things like that, how are they working to kind of build that game plan for so many new faces. And that's not something that's new. Obviously you had to do that last year for Old Dominion because Old Dominion had pretty much a whole new roster coming into that game as well. So maybe that does help you a little bit from a game planning standpoint, but that's going to be really interesting to kind of see how it all plays out.
And I think the defensive line for Virginia Tech is a strength. I think that this is an opportunity for the South Carolina offensive line look, let's not kid ourselves. South Carolina has new faces on the offensive line as well. New faces. And when I say that, I don't mean just transfers. I mean, guys that weren't playing last year that you might remember their name and, Tremont Bowe and Big Tree. But, this is going to be, I think, the most pivotal thing for South Carolina because Lenore Sellers can get out of pressure. But at the same time, if this defensive line for Virginia Tech has a field day against South Carolina. You got to pray it's not North Carolina all over again.
Yeah, I think it will be a little bit of a test for the South Carolina offensive line. Like, Virginia Tech lost, Antoine Powell-Rowland and tackle Anias Peoples, who were both 6th-round selections in the NFL draft. So that's going to be tough to replace, especially Powell-Rowland. Like, he was really good coming off the edge for him last year. And then the secondary, you also lost Dorian Strong, which I think was also a 6th-round pick in the draft. But they do return, their top 2 tacklers, linebackers Caleb Blitzen and Jaden Keller. I think, 83 and 72 tackles, respectively, between those two. But then, you also have to replace the Keontae Jenkins, who had 65 tackles, Sam Brunfield, 60 tackles, Kelly Lawson, 40 tackles. Like, so I think Brumfield and Lawson, they both went to Memphis and UCF to transfer. But there is a little bit of some guys of those coming back. But really, you look in that secondary too. Like, there's a lot of new faces in that secondary as well. And that the Virginia Tech secondary, I think, was something that you kind of looked at last year as could be potentially strong with Dorian Strong and the rest of those guys. But a lot of new faces in that secondary as well, who are going to have to be preparing to go up against Lenora Sellers and South Carolina's pretty much pass and attack and offensive game plan.
Yeah, and then, the monkey in the room that we haven't talked about yet is that Shane Beamer's alma mater. His dad coached there for eons.
I wonder how much that's going to be talked about on the broadcast.
I would say 37.5 is my over-under.
I'll go over.
Yeah, and this has to be tough for Shane Beamer one way or another, winning or losing to Virginia Tech. Gosh, I could do it all night. The kicker, John Love.
And how many times do they show Frank Beamer in the stands?
Oh, gosh. Hey, here's the real question, Alex. Is Frank Beamer wearing a Virginia Tech shirt and hat or a Gamecock shirt and hat?
Or maybe does he split it up? Does he go Virginia Tech hat, Carolina shirt? Or, yeah. And that's why he's going to be shown probably a lot on TV.
If I had to predict it, I think he would wear a Gamecock shirt and hat.
I think so.
Yeah. Just, look, as a guy that has a son, that's what I'd do.
Yeah.
So, regardless of allegiances. Now, I will say, if my son goes to Clemson, like, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. But the kicker, John Love, was 16 for 18 on field goals in 2024. I'm sorry, I don't know what the distances were. Alex, do you have that by chance?
Yeah, so he was 8 of 9 from 40 plus and 3 of 4 from 50 plus. And I'm pretty sure, I'm looking it up right now, I think he's from Spartanburg. And I think his brother is committed to Virginia Tech too for kicking. But he's a solid field goal kicker. Obviously, with those, 8 of 9 from 40 plus and 3 of 4 from 50 plus. So that's pretty solid. It can be a difference maker.
So, Alex, one of the questions, and Michael just got in the chat box, and hey, Brandon, I see you. I'm gonna get you in a minute here, but Michael says, will South Carolina have any special team fakes or trick plays? I'm gonna say yes.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Over a half. Yeah, there's gonna be at least one. I think it depends how the game's going. If the game is, there's going to be one regardless. But look, Virginia Tech knows that too. I'm not sharing state secrets.
Yeah.
But I think if the Gamecocks are winning handedly, I don't think there's going to be more than one unless the situation calls for it. But I would not be surprised to see an onside kick, a 2-point conversion, really anything and everything, a fake punt. Trust me, Shane Beamer, he wants to win this game.
Yeah, I was going to say, really just kind of depends on how the games go and the flow of the game, but would not be one bit surprised to see some of that type of stuff, and really wouldn't be surprised to see Virginia Tech do some of that as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a really good point, Alex. I don't know why I didn't think of that, because it's Frank Beamer and Shane Beamer, and you know what? If you're Virginia Tech, why wouldn't you do it?
You're right. It almost feels like it'd be like a disservice. It's like one of those two teams didn't do something special teams wise.
It's going to be Brent Pryball.
Yeah, right.